Have you ever wondered why Walmart Spark can't stop the scammers? Why the scammers have so many accounts, or how the scammers can consistently pass facial recognition, ID checks, etc.? Well, in this video, I'm going to explain all that and more as told by the head, or rather a former head of one of these scam driver cartels, who at her peak was making over $30K a month. I'll be breaking down how they do it, why these scams are so lucrative to the bosses, and stay tuned to the end of the video to learn about how you can protect yourself. Be sure to like and subscribe for more content like this, and without further ado, let's jump right into it. So first off, how do the scammers do it? Well, that's because it's organized crime, even when it's unaffiliated from the pros. In a recent article from Wired, I learned about Priscilla Barbosa, the former queen of her own rideshare mafia. So in a nutshell, she came from Brazil to the US on a tourist visa, joined a bunch of Facebook groups for Brazilians in Boston, started connecting with people that spoke her language, who helped her get a job at a local pizza place where she started off getting paid under the table like $800 a week. And that was going good for a while, allowed her to save some money and get a car. But then when a downturn happened for the summer or whatever, she got let go from the pizza place and had to look for another job. Now, when she was looking for another job on one of those aforementioned Facebook groups for people that spoke her language, she saw an ad on one of those Facebook groups about being your own boss and driving for Uber and Lyft, and to call this number to start now. So she called that number and got connected with a guy that basically told her that she can rent out Uber or Lyft accounts for $250 per week. It would have her face, her bank account, her car on there, but it would just be under somebody else's name. So she was unemployed, so she decided to try it out, and she made $2,000 just in her first week alone. Now keep in mind, this story starts pre-pandemic because I don't know anybody making $2,000 a week in Uber or Lyft nowadays, but stick with me for a minute. So after a while of driving a rideshare on that rented Uber account, it eventually got deactivated. So she called the guy to see did he have another account for her to use, and she got a Lyft account this time. Now, when she was driving for Lyft at one point, someday it asked her to verify her ID, and she called that guy again because she's like, what am I gonna do now? And basically he sent her back a picture of the license of the person whose Lyft account that was. So that's when she found out that this was actually a real person she was driving under, and they were getting part of that rent for renting out their Lyft account. So just to take a moment here to be perfectly clear, this was an identity theft in this case. This was actually a fraud ring with the person whose identity it was being complicit in the matter. Also around this time, she joined a couple of WhatsApp groups for other people who were basically renting identities on Uber, Lyft, etc., sharing all the tips and tricks, how to get all the workarounds done, etc. Now, how did she go from renting accounts of herself to actually being the queen of the mafia? I don't know why, but this reminds me of Scarface for some reason. So one day, a passenger forgot their wallet in her car, and she was trying to return it, was being a hassle. She decided to take a picture of that person's license, and later decided that she would use it to open up her own Uber and Lyft accounts. So she used the woman's name, but she used her own insurance, her own registration, her own picture, and get this is where it got interesting to me. She just made up a social security number out of thin air, and she woke up the next morning to being approved. So after she had now went to using her own Uber account for a couple of weeks, she met an acquaintance who basically said, hey, if you can find somebody to rent out my Uber account, I'll give you a piece of the rent. So basically allowing her to broker out now. And ultimately, because she was successful with that first one, other people found out about it and offered her more opportunities to help broker out these accounts. Now, a little while later, through some casual conversation at a house party, she basically found out that the onboarding processors for these rideshare companies, because as we know, like Checker and a lot of these other companies, third-party companies, are a part of that process. Basically, the onboarding processors couldn't verify social security numbers created after 2011. Apparently that's when the Social Security Administration changed the way that they issue SSNs. So from here, Ms. Barbosa decided, being that she actually is an intelligent woman, I give her that. She decided to go to the Social Security Verify website, started typing in random numbers, and would eventually identify some social security numbers that said that they were potentially issued after 2011. So now with this new information, she decided to start creating more driver accounts, and when Checker, which is like the company that does the background checks as I mentioned earlier, they try to have her verify those socials, she would just basically re-enter the same information and whatever account would eventually get approved. So We know how that process goes. She also met people around this time with real licenses to sell, with now, along with her SSN trick, allowed her to create Uber and Lyft accounts in bulk. Now, before I go on, I want to talk about how the people who were getting these licenses were getting them. I found this part interesting. There's a couple of different ways. Apparently, some of the people worked at car dealerships, and when you would apparently give your license to the people to do whatever they do with it, they were snapping a quick picture of that and collecting licenses that way. Also, she had people that were working at the DMV or the MVD that were giving information as well. And then the last one, which I find particularly interesting, there was a guy that would manufacture fender benders, just getting little accidents just to get into that point where they could take pictures of somebody else's license to exchange information and then add that to his roster as well. So she stockpiled those accounts and ultimately started renting them out at $250 a week, the same price she started at. And once she got to 8 people renting out accounts, that was bringing her in $2,000 a week, and she quit driving. By the way, $2,000 a week is $8,000 a month, which is a pretty solid starting salary, I'll say. So how were her and her people able to get around Uber security checks and facial ID recognition? So basically, as Uber started upgrading their tech, she started upgrading her methods to help protect her growing business. So she started using burner phones and burner encrypted email addresses. The people that would rent out the accounts to try to get them a license that looked as close to them as possible. Now, if she couldn't do that, she would Photoshop the renter's face onto the license, so when she signed up, although it would have the other person's legitimate information on their license, it would have the renter's face, so there would be no issue. By the way, this is likely the main reason that now they're doing these license checks at stores with Walmart Spark. A lot of people, even with the ID check, can pass them because of the same scenario nowadays. But if you have to whip out your ID at a store and show it to somebody in person, you can tell if it's a fake license or not. But I digress. She also photoshopped other information like the names from the license onto the insurance documents and made it match as much as she possibly could. But as I've said before about fraud, it's a cat and mouse game. And eventually Uber figured out something with the social security numbers, and over 35 of her customers were asked to present ID in person at Uber facilities. So those people basically had to walk away from their accounts. So she basically lost 35 customers at once. Now, let's take a moment to recognize that at $250 a week, $1,000 a month, 35 customers, that's a $35,000 drop of income per month. That's crazy, number one. That's $35,000 a month loss. But let's recognize that that wasn't her full roster, and you can only imagine how much she was making on a monthly basis at this time. But this wasn't the end. This was just the beginning of a new scam. At this time, she found out about DoorDash and the referral bonuses for first-time drivers. Additionally, at this time, DoorDash didn't ask for pictures of licenses either. So she would create new driver accounts, refer them to her, master driver account, rent out those fake driver accounts she created, and then with the people who are renting out those accounts, she would give them a 50-50 split of the sign-on bonus, which of course was more money for her, and then for the people who are renting out the account, that's just an extra cherry on top to help with that week's account rent. On top of that, she reached out to her 35 previously deactivated Uber drivers and brought them onto the roster as well. And the cherry on top, she also started making Instacart accounts as well because, you gotta diversify at that point. And of course, business was booming again. But unfortunately, the pandemic came soon after. Now, I say unfortunately sarcastically because pretty much every gig driver knows that once the pandemic came, those referral bonuses went through the roof. What were a couple $100 referral bonuses became thousands of dollar referral bonuses, about 2,000 plus for DoorDash and Instacart, etc. On top of that, there were layoffs galore and business was, I don't know what was above booming, but it was that exponentially. At that time, there were some drivers who were completing multiple referral bonuses weekly, coming back and doing 2 or 3 new accounts and referral bonuses per week. And at her peak during that time, she was earning around $15,000 per week. Absolutely insane. Now, I repeat, that was at the peak because pretty much from there, the downfall came. Now, I'm not going to drag it out, but in a nutshell, because DoorDash, Instacart, etc. were going so crazy, she also started getting requests to make Uber Eats accounts. And since Uber had already been the one to try to stop it, Uber knew something was off. And unfortunately, the FBI got involved. Yeah, the big boys. And she got busted. She served a couple years in prison, but the interesting part, during her trial, the government estimated she made almost $800,000 just during that little time, those couple of years that she was running out those accounts. So what can we learn from this? How does it relate to Walmart Spark scammers, and how can you protect your own information going forward? First off, you gotta realize this is big business in and of itself. If one person operating alone can make tens of thousands of dollars a month, you can only imagine how much the pro cartels who are actually taking people across the border and want to make sure they get all their money back and have a guarantee basically plan with these gig apps now are making on a monthly basis, especially with US immigration being what it is or was or whatever you want to say about it. Also, considering it literally took the FBI to stop a single independent scam operation, do you really think Walmart has a shot at stopping the professional organizations that are doing this? Also, essentially with these group chats, it's almost like tech support. Once you tell them that there's a problem, you have basically 50 people trying to think about how to resolve it. And if you think about it, if the pros really want to have a pro IT person in the chat, they can pay just as well as any Silicon Valley organization. And by the way, I'm pretty sure that every gig app has a boatload of scam drivers, but with Walmart Spark, you sit around way more than with any other gig app, and you can't help but to observe what's going on around you, especially since everyone is at the same locations each day, seeing the same people. But what can you do about it to protect yourself at least, and protect your information going forward to ensure that you're not contributing to the problem? Well, number one, don't run out your account and start a cartel, because that obviously leads to federal prison. Number two, I mentioned in my last video that Walmart Spark actually has an email that you can use if you want to report driver fraud or suspected driver fraud at your Walmart. I'll put it down there in the description and the link below. I don't remember it off the top of my head. But I think most importantly is that make sure you keep your ID safe. If you go to a car dealership and they want to look at your ID for whatever reason, they want to take it off the floor, tell them, hey, no, I'm concerned with identity theft. But just in general, be careful about people taking your ID and holding it and going off into back rooms with it for 20 minutes at a time. And by the way, if they don't like it, that's probably a red flag. And lastly, if you ever get any fender benders and people need to, see your ID, or you can see my insurance information, but do they really need to see your ID? But if you got value from this video, do me a favor and give it a like. And if you want to see more content like this, be sure to subscribe to the channel as well. And if you want to learn more about what Walmart has been doing lately to try to stop the scammers and to return to its status of the best gig app, then watch this video now.